This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war. This happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in a silver sea, which serves it in the office of a wall, or as a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happier lands. This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England.
So I decided to do my own little bit and try and encourage all of you to try and keep Britain tidy. Use your bins, please. A global megastar is born at Emma Raducanu. Winning the US Open is truly incredible. Clap, 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 clap. Whilst at the same time, Nigel seems to think that Romanian men, which is Emma's dad, are evil child traffickers. Wonder how this works out in Nigel's head, because a lot of this stuff, this logic that he seems to claim that he has, doesn't really work out, so we're going to dissect that today. So in several interviews, Nigel was caught making nasty, racist comments about Romanians, and then as the interviews proceeded from the original one where he made his racist slur, he seems to try and change the story, and I'm starting to notice with Nigel that he does this a lot in order to really get his message across. So let's listen to James O'Brien really take Nigel to task on all of this.
You've mentioned your discomfort at listening to foreign languages on a train recently.
I made the point that I got on a train and went for several stops, and there were a lot of people around me and no one spoke English. And I thought, you know, this is... I didn't say I didn't object to it. I felt slightly uncomfortable. And I think actually...
Why would you feel uncomfortable unless you're slightly racist? Why does it bother you? Why are you even noticing it? Why aren't you just getting on with your day? The only thing that comes to my mind is that maybe he feels threatened, but he's being threatened by foreigners? Is that what he's saying?
Isn't that the problem? Isn't this, of all the countries in Europe, the most accepting, the most tolerant?
You said, I don't feel very comfortable in that situation. You did say you had a problem.
I didn't feel comfortable, no.
Yes. Your wife is a German speaker.
Well, my children are too, yeah.
Does that make you feel uncomfortable?
No, because they can speak English, and the whole point about
How do you know those people couldn't?
Well...
Hey, something burning? Oh, wait, it's you, because you just got burnt.
Well, maybe they could, but I got the distinct feeling that it certainly wasn't their language of choice. And if you look at the...
I can just about hold my own in several languages. How on earth would he know if I spoke it fluently or not? How would he tell from the accent that I couldn't just flip into English? He wouldn't have a clue. He's just making up stuff.
A primary school situation in the East End of London, you know, where you've now got schools where a majority don't speak English. Doesn't that say to us...
No, you've got
Doesn't
schools...
that say to us? Doesn't that say to us that what we want is a sensible, balanced immigration policy where we want people with skills to come into Britain, but we also want integration in society.
Of course we do. And the schools you refer
happening.
to, the pupils you refer to, are registered and recorded as having English as a second language. They're not registered and recorded as not being able to speak English. That's precisely that sort
and
of...
some of both.
Well, yes, but no one's counted them, so your own children would fit into that category.
Would you like some aloe vera? You just got burned.
Well, hopefully, lots of people can speak different languages, but the point I'm making is, do we want to live in an integrated society?
No, forgive me. The point you're making is that schools in the East End are full of children who can't speak English. I just want you to recognise that's not true, what you just said.
Come from
the
homes.
children who are typified as speaking English as a second language would include your own daughters. Their mother tongue being German.
They come from homes where English is most definitely not the first language, and in too many cases is not the language at all. Now, look.
He's lying through his teeth. He hasn't got a clue. He's just making up stuff.
You know,
but no one's counted how many people are in the second category.
No, and it would be a very helpful and useful thing if they did, and perhaps we'd be even more surprised and even more shocked. But the argument...
Or perhaps we'd realise that most bilingual children in this country are children like yours.
Well, let's turn it around the other way, shall we?
Yes, let's.
And he's got him on the ropes!
Talk about immigration. Let's talk about Europe. Let's talk about the European elections. I am making one very simple point. We cannot have any form of managed migration into Britain and remain a member of the European Union because we have an open door to nearly 500 million people. And the argument, James, I'm putting is this. We'd be far better to have an immigration policy that didn't, as it currently does, discriminate against engineers from India or doctors from New Zealand in favour of anybody, regardless of skill levels or backgrounds, coming from Southern and Eastern Europe. And that is the great debate. And when Nick Clegg, took me on, and I tried to have that debate with him, and he was very reluctant on that particular point to engage. Cameron and Miliband run a country mile away from that debate, and that, I think, is at the heart of our relationship with Europe.
Indeed, and I mean, if that was the debate that you'd offered to have on this programme, we'd have it now. But what the caller asked you was why so many people think you're racist.
Yeah, well, I think, yes, we've had our idiots.
And part of the answer would be, you talk about children who can't speak English as a first language without mentioning it includes your own children.
I mean, what is racism? Is racism between races? I mean, I was talking about.
Don't you know?
I was talking.
How can you say you're not something if you don't know what it is?
I mean, is race about colour? Is race about race, or is it about nationality? I made a comment there that wasn't intended to say any more that I felt uncomfortable about the rate and pace of change and numbers of people.
No, you felt
coming
uncomfortable about people speaking foreign languages,
yes,
despite the fact that presumably your own wife does when she phones home to Germany.
I suppose she speaks it on the train, That's
why
the point
not?
I'm making.
Is she not allowed to? Can't she speak German wherever she wants? And what about the line about not wanting to live next door to Romanians? It's perfectly acceptable for people not to want to.
I was asked if a group of Romanian men moved in next door to you, would you be concerned?
What about if a group of German children did? What's the difference?
The difference, and you know what the difference
is.
is.
No, I honestly don't. This is, I think, where the disconnect is between your position and mine. What is the difference?
We want an immigration policy based on controlling not just quantity but quality as well. And we have a problem that and unfortunately, those communist countries, which I've visited, and I've visited the Roma encampments, and I've seen the real poverty that people live in, and we talk about exclusion in society. Go and see, since the fall of communism, what has happened to the Roma communities in those countries. They don't get jobs, they get nowhere to live, and they have been forced, in many cases, to a life of crime. And what has happened with an open door is it's been an open invitation for the traffickers. Now, we all know this is going on.
Okay.
The Metropolitan Police
trafficking is a crime, of course.
Trafficking is a crime.
And trafficked people are victims of crime.
Yes, and the Metropolitan Police have produced their crime statistics, and they're eye-watering. And I'm saying, let's get a grip on it.
I know you're saying that about Romanians, but why can't you understand how many people feel troubled that you're also talking about them? 32 million people are looking for jobs in Europe, and that big clunking fist pointing, saying that they're coming.
That was a provocative poster.
They're coming for your job. That frightens people. People who are already here working. People who my children go to school with. Their parents are troubled by the idea that they're now being demonised and typified. And you gloss so smoothly and so slickly demonising Romanians and demonising Germans.
I'm not demonising anybody.
But you just asked you a question about Romanians, and you started talking about people traffickers.
I'm demonising.
About whether or not he's in top shape. Well, he goes down from the left hand. He gets caught right away.
I'm demonising a political class that has allowed us to have an open door to allow things like this to happen.
Okay, so when I say Romanian and you start talking about people traffickers, why didn't you say people are perfectly entitled to feel uncomfortable about living next door to people traffickers, wherever they're from? Why did you say Romanians?
I didn't say Romanians. I was asked a question: if a group of Romanian men moved in next to you, would you be concerned? And if you lived in London, I think you would be.
Yeah. So that leaves the open-ended question: would he be upset if Emma's dad moved in next door to him? But it gets worse for Nigel, because he then tries to defend his position a few days later in an interview with the Channel 4 reporter, and it totally backfires. But if you pay close attention, he also tries to reframe what the question was, and it's not about him and what he thinks, it's what people would think. But we know that's a lie from what we just saw.
You got it. I was asked a question, would people be concerned? And I think the answer is a lot of people would be concerned. But
would you be concerned?
What about
would you be?
Because they know there is the trafficking problem, they know there is the crime problem.
Demonising Romanians and demonising Germans.
I'm not demonising anybody.
But you just asked you a question about Romanians and you started talking about people traffickers.
I'm demonising.
But I in no way want to give the impression, as I might have done at the end of last week, that a whole group of people should be labelled as being bad. I don't. And, of course, the vast majority of Romanian people who come to this country are good people who are working hard.
But some people are already saying the mask has slipped. What you actually did there was maybe a bit tired, end of a long day. You let slip what you really think, which is that...
what I did was I didn't answer the question.
I was asked if a group of Romanian men moved in next door to you, would you be concerned?
What about if a group of German children did? What's the difference?
The difference, and you know what the difference is.
No, I honestly don't.
I said, look, you know what I mean. I was, in a way, what I was trying
But my question is, did the mask slip?
No, the answer is, I didn't do what I normally do, which is if I'm asked a question, to answer it honestly. I really didn't want to have a debate on this issue, but I've now been forced into it. And when you look at it, when you discuss it, you realise, actually, open-door immigration to some southern and eastern European countries, frankly, doesn't make sense.
So he defends himself, tries to suggest that actually it was taken out of context, suggests that he wasn't able to answer properly. And then he does it again and says certain countries shouldn't be allowed in. But then listen to this, where he says nothing wrong with Romania.
But what have you got against Romanians?
Nothing, but I've got a problem with Romania. Open-door immigration to some southern and eastern European countries, frankly, doesn't make sense.
Whenever you're listening to this man, you really do have to slice apart what he's said, because he's a slippery fish. He flip-flaps.
Yeah. Very big problem with Romania. I've been there. There are 3 million people there in the Roma minority who are treated appallingly. They can't get jobs, they can't get housing, they live in the most extraordinary conditions, and they have fallen victim, many of them have fallen victim, to an organised crime gang network of a very serious dimension. And all I'm saying is this. I'm saying, shouldn't we be able, at Dover, to stop known criminal gangs
demonising Romanians and demonising Germans?
I'm not demonising anybody.
But you just asked you a question about Romanians and you started talking about people traffickers.
I'm demonising.
from entering Britain? Well, the common sense answer is yes, but as EU members, we can't do it. And what I said, you know, would people be concerned if a group of Romanian men moved in next door? These were newspaper headlines run by our biggest tabloids week after week. That's what stirred up the hysteria, not me.
But you did say that, though. You did say you'd be worried about living next door to Romanians. You wouldn't mind Germans, but if they were Romanians,
I didn't say I would
be
worried, and I didn't say people should be worried. I said people would be worried because they read all this stuff in the newspapers and they've seen the crime statistics.
I was asked if a group of Romanian men moved in next door, would you be concerned?
What about if a group of German children did? What's the difference?
The difference, and you know what the difference
No,
is.
I honestly don't.
Frankly, if we stopped criminal gangs coming in from Romania and other parts of the world, people wouldn't be concerned.
Yeah, but you got in a muddle about the statistics, didn't you? Because in the advert that you took out, you said Romanians are responsible for 7% of crime across Europe. And that simply isn't true, is it? Romanians make up, according to the statistics, 7% of the criminal gangs.
The World Cup. And Belinda, I just can't understand how something so small can be so impressive.
Well, Mark, you would know about that. Thank you very much.
It doesn't make them responsible for that much of the crime.
Well, actually, interestingly, if you delve down into those Europol figures, and this is stunning, 90% of all card skimming operations across the whole of the European Union are done by Romanian and Bulgarian criminal gangs. So let's get this clear.
is banging on about here is actually from the Daily Express. And surprise, surprise, they've got something wrong by the looks of it. And they seem to be saying stuff about foreign nationals. That is negative. Shock. We have Bulgarian and Romanian gangs committing blah, 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 blah. You can read it yourself. I don't even want to really read it. But this web page is called Full Fact. They go into detail about this. They go and try and find out whether or not these claims are true. And they actually go all the way to the dedicated Czech and plastic crime unit. They find a DCI called Paul Bernard, which is where the quote has come from. And he no longer works there. It seems as if actually what has happened is there's no statistical data to prove that whatsoever. But it's interesting because Nigel then backtracks on this a little bit later on, suggesting actually people have backtracked on it as well, and they've removed the data because they don't want to cause a problem, which is just insane conspiracy theory stuff. Go into detail about the 28,000 serious offenders, except they're not serious offenders. They're people who have been arrested but not charged. And it only relates to arrests. So you could be arrested and be a suspect, but then they might find the actual person who committed the crime and release you. So an arrest is really meaningless, to be perfectly honest. You could suspect anyone of anything, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this information is good information. And you seem to find this throughout the article. But it's funny how Nigel's picked up on this and then has believed it to be absolute gospel truth, whereas in fact it's satanic and evil.
So let's get this clear.
But that's not an official statistic,
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is. I mean, it is astonishing. You know, the wall fell Communism went, and that was a good thing. And some of those countries made the transition to being Western democracies. Some of them have not yet made that transition. I want to trade with Romania. I want us to be open, to have good Romanians come to Britain. And, you know, we've got doctors, we've got lawyers, we've got people driving taxis. There are lots of Romanians here contributing, but we need to have the ability to stop the crime networks.
But if you're giving...
So the thing I always bring up is if you were to replace that word Romania maybe with the ethnic minority of the Jewish population, and how would it sound? Would you live next door to a group of Jewish men? Think about Nigel saying that answer. Would that be accepted? No, it is intolerant, it is awful, and yet he has the brass to go and then celebrate Emma's work and achievements. Frankly, this starts to remind me of Donald Trump, where he just believed anything that Fox News said. It was like this weird, psychotic, sociopathic influence on the President of the United States by just leaving Fox News on and listening to that and going, oh, that's what's actually happening in the world, without actually taking into account that Fox News is incredibly biased.
To give you a sense of just how much he watches cable news, a few hours later he was on Air Force One and you could actually hear the commercials from Fox News blaring in the background.
Doing good, thank you. How was your first flight, sir?
That's real. That is the Empire Carpet jingle playing at full blast. Trump just made the interior of Air Force One sound like the living room of an old person who died 3 days ago and who nobody's found yet.
Yeah, it's quite hard to explain. But basically, there is a catheter cowboy on Fox News, and Fox News is obviously where our current president gets lots of information, which is both fact and sad. And so to try and sneak information to him, we've been taking out ads on Fox News with our own catheter cowboy, trying to explain to him things like what the nuclear triad is.
Yeah. So it seems to me that Nigel just believes whatever he reads. But we'll end on a more positive note. Emma, congratulations, well done in your achievements, like absolutely phenomenal work on getting to the final and winning. I hope you enjoyed my political observations this week. If you'd like to support me, please share the video with others and post about it on social media. If you're keen for more, subscribe, comment, like, and hit that notification button. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on Political X.